Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the latest show in the Space & Co. Comm.Unity events that we've been hosting. My name is Mark Jones, and it's great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm looking forward to facilitating a really fantastic conversation about transition and change in the workplace. Now, these events have been designed to bring the membership together, so friends and members of Space & Co. And we've got a couple of things in mind. We want to inspire you and equip you to make change and to work through all of the issues that we've, of course, collectively been doing through this year. And we're interested in your professional life as well as your personal life. So I'm excited about the great speakers that we have with us today to speak about this subject of transition and change. Now, of course, I was going to say too that this transition topic is an incredible one that we're going through. If there is a macro topic for 2020, it would have to be this one. So, as I said, I'm really looking forward to it. I'm joined, of course, by Space & Co. National Director Shay Hooper. Great to see you.
Thank you. I'm really pleased to be back, Mark.
Yeah, it's great to be back. And we've done a few of these now, so yeah, this is...
Home away from home.
This feels good. This feels good. Yeah, we get to be in an office, by the way, which is exciting. Now, we do have two speakers, as I mentioned, that are joining us today here in the studio. The first is Kyla Shelley. She's Operations Manager at WIRES, which, for those playing at home, is the New South Wales Wildlife Information, Rescue and Education Service. Great to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to, of course, wow, if you think back to January and the bushfire season and all that we went through as a community, but particularly the animals. So talking about transition in that context, really important, and I'm looking forward to what we can learn. So thank you.
My pleasure.
And of course, our second speaker today is Sasha Dumaresq. She's a career and culture consultant. She's going to talk about how to lead with clarity and transition with ease. So Sasha, great to have you with us too.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
Excellent. You've got some tools and techniques for us to use too, so we're going to get practical with it. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
Excellent. Yep. Okay, now a couple of quick housekeeping tips as we get going here. We're using the live stream platform, and I don't know how many of you might be familiar with live stream, but there is a questions tab on the right-hand side of your screen that you should see. We're very keen, not super needy, but we're pretty keen to get your questions. We want to get your feedback and send it through as we go along. So I really encourage people to do that because we want to get your comments and your questions, and they'll come through to me here on the iPad, and we can incorporate that into this conversation to make the most of our time together. So don't be shy to do that. Of course, this will go for an hour, so make yourself comfortable. Get some water, a pen and a paper so you can write down all these great ideas, and we'll go from there. Now, Shay, before we introduce Kyla and we kick things off, I've been thinking about workplace change and transition, of course, and we've been through an incredible period of time this year with workplace transitions. Some people say we will never go back to the way things were. What do you reckon?
What I think is that we can't shy away from acknowledging the change that's happened. I think the disruption has been significant. And I think we need to be proud of how well we actually have all adapted in our own spaces to what's happened and been able to do that so rapidly. But with regards to the way that we work, and particularly with the transition back to the workplace, I think the disruption has been too sustained. So it would be naive to assume that we're just going to go back to the way we were. I think that in many ways the change has accelerated what was already happening. And with regards to the workplace, I believe that it continues to play a really valuable role in how we work. But what I would say is that the purpose of it is changing. And we need to lean into that, and we need to explore what that change is. And I think that will be the real test for this next stage of transition.
You know, it was interesting coming into the studio today. I saw on a bus, you know, on the top of the bus above the windscreen, it said, "We're all in this together." I know that that's a song. But I actually thought about that in the context of the workplace. We are all in this together. It's like our work families have taken on a whole new level of depth and importance to us, right?
Oh, completely, completely.
All right, well, there's the bus metaphor for the day.
Yes.
Over to you.
Yeah, so I think that what would be really wonderful now is to hear from someone who's been no stranger to disruption and change, which is Kyla, so thank you for joining us. So as Mark said, Kyla's operations manager at Wires. So with a team and a volunteers of 2,500, Wires responds day and night to public reports of wildlife who are injured or sick or orphaned, and they need to come to their rescue. And most recently what Kyla has been leading the organisation through is the significant disruption of what we now know as the Black Summer, and now of course helping the organisation work through the transition phase beyond that. So welcome Kyla. 2020 has obviously been a big year for Wires.
It's certainly been a big year for Wires, and I think it's been a big year for everyone. I think every Australian and every international citizen, it's been a really big year. I think none of us could have been prepared for the last 9 months of fairly sequential, not just major disruption, but quite a bit of trauma. And I think that all of that has taken a toll on all of us in different ways. So Wires is Australia's largest wildlife rescue organisation, and we have been rescuing and caring for sick, injured and orphan animals for almost 35 years. We normally receive around 170,000 calls to our 1300 number annually. We would normally get around 8,000 of those from interstate, and we have 28 regional branches based around New South Wales with over 3,000 volunteers now, which has been growing. And in fact, we had over 1,500 people sign up in January alone, and their training has had to be delayed due to COVID, but we are working on some innovative new ways to deliver our training content to hopefully have them all up and running and active before the next spring summer. Wire's mission is to actively rehabilitate and preserve Australian wildlife and inspire others to do the same. And for many years now, we've been seeing continual annual increases of between 10 and 20% in terms of the numbers of calls that we're getting to help native animals in distress. And that increased demand on our service, that increased demand to assist native animals, has been constantly compelling us to have a culture of continuous change. So we have actually been working for many, many years now with an ongoing focus of continuous improvement. So at the heart of everything we do, we're actually focused on what we can do better to deliver the service that we're actually providing to wildlife, how we can help more animals consistently faster. And at the same time, we're always looking at how we can actually increase our efficiency and our impact in how we engage our volunteers in that rescue process, and how we're actually helping the community callers that are actually ringing in and asking for assistance with those animals, particularly when many of them may also be distressed. So even with that approach to constant change, and that's actually seen us implement some really significant improvements to our processes, particularly through technology, which is obviously driving innovation in industries everywhere on a continual basis. A couple of the major advancements that we actually implemented around 5 years ago was moving to a mobile responsive website, which has been incredibly significant when we're getting consistently over 65% of our visitors are coming to our site via mobile devices. And also implementing a rescue communication platform that has made it much easier for us to deal with higher call volumes consistently faster. So we're using a two-way rescue communication platform that enables us to contact thousands of volunteers. We can contact every single available volunteer that has the right training in the right region that is available at that particular day and time across multiple devices. So we can contact them instantly, simultaneously, and that has definitely enabled us to deliver a faster rescue service. There's still a huge amount of additional demand out there, and so we're always looking for more volunteers and always wanting to continue to improve our processes and systems further, but it's been massive advancements in terms of the delivery of our service, and we're always looking at how we can deliver change that adds genuine value to wildlife, value to volunteers and value to the community. Despite having a regular approach to continual change, nothing could have prepared us for the last spring summer. You know, the last 9 months have been unlike anything we had ever experienced as individuals and as an organisation, and I think that's fairly true for everyone in the Australian community and internationally as well. I think we saw a series of events of major emergencies that whilst on their own were not unusual within Australia. Drought isn't unusual, fire's not unusual, but to come out of one of the worst droughts on record, to then actually have over September through to March, hundreds of continuous fires raging over that whole period of time, creating destruction on a scale of which we had just never seen. You know, we actually were witnessing millions of hectares of land destroyed, much of which was threatened species habitat, and conservatively over 1 billion animals were estimated to have been lost. And that is a loss of biodiversity that is, to use the word, unprecedented, and it's also not something that can be easily addressed. It actually is creating a long-term problem. You know, before the fires, Australia was facing an extinction crisis. We had hundreds of species already at risk of extinction, and when you add emergency events of that scale that have created that kind of loss, the true toll on native wildlife is actually still unknown. So there's been easily at least 119 species identified as at high risk and needing urgent intervention, and there's still hundreds where we don't actually know what their status is. So there's a huge, long road to recovery ahead of us, and a lot of work has begun, but there is still a lot more to do. I think coming out of the fires, the first thing was about how to respond to the immediate stress, the immediate events, the immediate rescue requirements. And on top of just the rescue requirements, there was such an impact on the community, both nationally and internationally, that the contact coming into wires was on a scale of which we'd never witnessed. So we received in the first 12 weeks of 2020 over 86,000 incoming calls, over 500,000 emails, and there was 3.6 million people that visited our website. Now, no matter how prepared you are for change and no matter how much you're wanting to consistently increase your service to be able to assist more animals, no one could have prepared for that level of change so rapidly. And I think, as much as could have been expected given the scale of that event, that our systems, our processes, our team, our volunteers did incredibly well, as did so many other organisations responding to such a difficult series of crisis events. And I think coming out of it, as we know that we're facing a whole lot of ongoing change requirements, because we're looking at how we can actually ensure that our native species will have a long-term future in the wild that is sustainable. One of the biggest lessons for us, I guess, is that on a problem of this size, a completely new approach will be required. And we know that collaboration, I guess on a scale of which we've never seen before, across agencies, different organisations, across states, will be required to make this happen. And I think that's one of the key areas that we've been focused on as well, whilst continuing all our day-to-day activities and wanting to scale those up in response to what's happened. We've also been looking at how we can collaborate differently to deliver even better outcomes for wildlife. So 3 of the key examples of that are that we made a decision in the first week of January to deliver a national response to the national crisis, thanks to the support of the community that made that possible. And so we were able to support within the subsequent 3 or 4 months over 240 projects to assist wildlife nationally across different organisations and vets. We're very actively focused on massive upgrading of our dedicated rescue office to be able to handle a lot more calls from the coming spring, summer onwards. And we're doing a lot of very exciting, innovative work with some major partners to deliver some incredible new projects that will really be designed to deliver great conservation outcomes long-term for wildlife and habitat regeneration. So we've come a long way, we've done a lot, but there's still a long way to go, and that's an amazing challenge and a great opportunity. Thank you for the opportunity to share the story.
Oh, that's great. Well, look, if I can jump in, and we'd actually love to get your questions coming through. You might have some for Kyla. I actually, and we'll hear more from you too in a minute, by the way. But reflecting on the call volumes, firstly, well done for remembering all those numbers. I mean, they're just staggering to think about it, right? What was it like for you personally to be in a team dealing with this onslaught of incoming need and requests?
Exhausting.
Yeah.
overwhelming, I think stressful in a new way to anything I'd experienced previously. I think in over 2 months I had one day off and was doing like 16-hour days, and it's hard for anyone to sustain that. And yet I was like, that was just a drop in the ocean, and I was looking at what other people were experiencing and dealing with and thinking how fortunate I was to have had that experience. So I think we all just felt we had to step up to the challenge and do our best to make a difference. And you know, it felt like we just couldn't do enough, and we couldn't do enough fast enough, but we were certainly doing all we could.
How many people work at Wires?
It's only a small number of staff. I think we had about 6 full-time staff at the time, and
really?
our casuals. We did get some additional help, but we have thousands of volunteers doing incredible work all the time out there rescuing and caring for animals.
Yeah, look, another key word that I picked up on was trauma. And we don't use that word lightly in any context, I'd like to add. We tend to soften it in our language. So I was just interested to unpack a little bit, to the extent that you're comfortable, by the way. But talking about, certainly there's trauma for the animals, quite clearly. But, you know, people who work, I presume, who volunteer for Wires and work for Wires, you care deeply. You're in this space because you love these beautiful animals, right? Yes. So in a transition like this, which has brought on so quickly, what's been your reflection on the best way to deal with trauma? And you could probably still be going through this, by the way. I don't know.
I think certainly being part of a great team does make a really big difference. I think to feel that you're not in it alone is critical to coping, and being able to focus on the opportunity to create positive change, sometimes out of a really dark situation, is also really important. And I think supporting people that are going through tough times is also highly significant, and making sure that they've got a chance to have a voice, and that you're aware that everyone will experience events like this very differently.
Now, a question I've got here, by the way, from somebody, a participant, saying, what are some of the new upcoming projects that you have in the pipeline, and how can the community get involved? Isn't that a great question?
That's a fantastic question, and there'll be a lot announced over the next 6 weeks. So I'm not sure that I can actually pre-announce them, but I would love people to stay engaged, to sort of like follow us on social media, to watch our blog. They can even email in, and I'll share information via email later, but there's probably not much more I could say today. Right,
and go to your mobile responsive website.
Oh, of course,
right? Yes. We haven't rehearsed this, I promise. Wires.org.au, is that right?
Yes, wires.org.au.
Yeah, okay, great. And another question here is, what's the busiest time of the year for Wires? It sounds like you're actually pretty busy now in the off-season, if I could say that.
It's busy all the time. Like every day there would be hundreds of animals that need assistance, and we're able to respond a lot to that based on the incredible support from the community that call in themselves. Many of those will actively get involved where it's safe to do so, to assist those animals. It might be by transporting that animal to a vet for immediate assessment, and then we can follow up to bring that animal into care for rehabilitation. And as I said, incredible volunteers. We're always needing more volunteers. There are never enough to respond to every call across every region, across every time of day and night. So that's another major way that people can get involved, which is fantastic. And I think making sure that people continue to show their care for wildlife, their desire to ensure that wildlife are preserved long term and that habitat is protected. I think we all need to make sure we have a strong, clear voice for everyone that's making decisions around that, because it's very easy sometimes, I think, for our natural assets to be undervalued. And I think when people really thought they might be at risk of disappearing, it was very clear how much it means to every Australian, and I think even so many international people, what Australian wildlife means to them when they think of Australia. And they do want to see animals in the wild, not just in captivity.
That's right. Well, yeah, I think even just this experience here is a great example of what I love about the Australian community spirit, is we're all quick to say, how can I help?
Yes.
Which is great.
Yeah.
We've got another question here. A participant on the out there says, is there anything you would do differently if you had known this crisis of Australia's Black Summer was going to be as large as it was?
I'd probably say hundreds of things. And it's actually hard to unpack that, because you can't go back and redo an event of that scale. And I think one of the hardest things when it comes to preparing for a natural disaster is not knowing where it will strike and when. You know, I think one of the things that's been heartbreaking for me, and yet, you know, the agencies that were fighting those fires could not have done more. You know, you look at all of those groups like the RFS who just did outstanding work protecting people and property, and yet we still had some tragic losses on that scale. But we were dealing with fires that were so large, that were so big, hundreds at a time, that so many had to be literally left to burn. And that's why so much habitat and so much wildlife would have been lost in that process. And I know no one could have done more at the time, but I would love to think that in a future situation that was similar, and unfortunately, due to a lot of the changes in our climate that we know about, we are told that there will be a lot more of these intense extreme events, like you know, more frequent events like this and higher intensity. So I really do hope that the people, all of us, because we're going to all play a role in actually influencing how that would be managed, are looking at how we could reduce risk and mitigate some of that threat and damage, you know, by being able potentially, say, to more proactively protect key habitat, for example, and key species as part of the process of protecting people and property as well.
So I'd also be interested, you know, looking ahead, if maybe you want to share a few thoughts, is how we transition to doing more to protect and help animals and the species recover. So, you know, rebuilding up, hopefully, those stocks of incredible animals out in the wild.
Yes. Well, I think there's got to be a lot of different action taken. I think there's got to be a lot of work done to protect remaining habitat, and also to rebuild a lot of critical corridors. So, you know, you need to, and this is where we've got to listen to our scientists and our ecologists, which is not my specialty, but they're the ones that need to lead this conversation. And I really just hope that every corporation that's involved in, you know, urban planning, for example, actually takes their opportunity here to do this differently, to still benefit humans as much as we need, but also at the same time do it better for wildlife. And I think we can all just play a role in making better decisions, like decisions that are more environmentally friendly, that are socially responsible, and that we, I guess, collectively can again just have a much bigger impact.
And it sounds to me like, given the strength of your volunteer crew, we've got a comment here, you know, how important is it for volunteers to deal with a crisis? How do they help? You know, this latent demand, if you like, to be involved and to actually be part of the solution. It sort of feels like we've got a sea of 1,000 voices out there with people with ideas about how to, you know, make the environment a better place in terms of maybe sealing off areas to help those places, you know, restore, etc.
That's it. Look, there are just so many different strategies that are all really valuable in making a difference. So I think definitely, as I said, making sure that, you know, we don't take away more of the remaining habitat, for example. You know, we really need to make sure that it's about putting a certain value on the natural assets we have, because you can't just replace, you know, for example, old growth forests with some new trees. It's so much more complicated than that. And I think when people step back and think about it, they know that. But that's why it really takes a lot of planning to actually sort of say, okay, so, you know, how do we work with the conservation specialists? And there are some organisations doing amazing work in this space, and I'm hoping to see why it's more involved in that as well, doing great work to do, I guess, what I'd call the most immediate preservation work around species at risk of extinction, to hopefully, you know, make sure that doesn't happen. But often an animal is let go so long in terms of the drop in their population before any serious action's taken. And I think that's where we need to look at what we classify currently as common species, and keep in mind they're probably not as common as people might think. And I think it's, you know, where it's probably worth a lot more investment in research and other activities to actually make sure that we really do have data on what we have left, and then we work with the experts to work out how to protect it. And make sure that, you know, we're never looking at a future where Australia doesn't have wildlife in the wild.
Yeah, there was a really scary statistic I saw. In the coming years we won't have any koalas in the wild, for example, right? We all think koalas are everywhere, but they're not.
No, they're definitely not. And, you know, so that, and they've been a major, I guess, species of focus, and and it's critically important. No one wants to think we would lose them, but there's hundreds of other species as well that need the same kind of focus and attention.
As we think about lessons learnt from your experience, what would you say sort of the top few things might be? you know, if you were to sort of transpose yourself into other environments and workplaces, what would you say the main things that you've come away with thinking about that, you know, that terrible black summer?
Major lessons, I guess some would be that out of any disaster or challenge, I think there are also incredible opportunities. And I hope that a disaster like this will actually drive a lot of positive change that might not otherwise have maybe captured the hearts and minds of the community in the same way. So I hope that that's consistent. I think, again, none of us could have imagined we'd go straight from the fires to something like COVID and have a global pandemic. So, you know, we are just dealing with things that no one's had to work through before, and it's about being able to be responsive. I think definitely valuing your team and supporting each other is critical. And also just, I guess the biggest one for me is looking at how we can create change that delivers the most value. You know, there's always ways we can do everything better, and I think if we're focused on how we can deliver more value to people, to animals and the environment, then we'll make a lot better decisions.
Shay, you got any reflections on what it must be like for these guys? I mean, what an incredible story.
Yeah, I really, it's so removed from the experiences that I've had that I can only feel admiration and just so grateful for the work that you and your team have obviously done, and the volunteers, and then just so warming that the community response has been so significant.
Unbelievable.
When you said at the beginning just the amount of people who have registered to volunteer that you can't even maintain the training for them, and I mean that's heartwarming, and like what you said, just the positiveness that comes out of that. And we've seen lots of types of innovation and great things that have emerged through this disruption. Yes. Yeah. And yeah, I think we have to hold on to those and be proud of those because they give us the energy to keep going. So well done.
Oh, thank you. It's a very big effort, and I feel like a very small part in a very big puzzle, and I'm constantly amazed by the incredible work done by the team that surround me and the volunteers in the field and all the other organisations that are part of this work. And I can't thank the community enough for their support. Without their ongoing support for all of the organisations that are doing this incredible work on the ground, we wouldn't be able to do it. So thank you for that. And yeah, please get as involved as you would like. And there's just so many organisations doing great work. Make sure that they know that you value them.
Well, before Shay introduces Sasha, our next speaker, I think a quick reflection from me too is the speed, right? So again, the theme of transition, but how quickly we can go from a status quo to, in this case, the Black Summer, an unfolding disaster.
Yes.
And I think this year we've seen so much change so quickly.
Yes.
Right, so we're kind of almost reflecting here a little bit to say, wow, look what we've just been through. And I think that's probably a key theme. I don't know if I'm setting you up nicely for some of you, excellent. But understanding, I think, cognitively that it is moving fast is my takeaway. So thank you so much for your insights and sharing the story of Wires today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and share some of our journey.
Great.
Yes, thank you. And yes, perfect. I think we are all keen to hear because with any change, with any disruption, we know we need some strategies and we need some tools and we need to look at how can we contribute as best we can to get through this. And so really delighted that we have yourself along, Sasha, who, as Mark introduced, is a career and culture consultant. And she's going to take us through a model today that looks at how we better understand our own beliefs, principles, expectations, and how we use that to really affect positive change. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Wonderful. So hello everyone, lovely to see you all today. And I just want to say, Kyla, thank you so much for that detailed and incredible effort that you've done. It has been amazing to hear, and I can understand the challenge and the dedication and the hard work. And that's really key to so many workplaces at the moment, is being able to shift and being able to change. And you do incredible work, so thank you so much. And it's inspired me actually to get involved at a deeper level, so I'll be in touch.
Wonderful.
Yeah, wonderful. So today, gosh, we're talking about change, we're talking about transition, we're talking about workplaces and people shifting, we're talking about environments. We're talking about so many different things that will affect change. And from where I'm sitting today, what I've seen with so many businesses, it has been about the human capacity for change. It's been about how are we supporting not only ourselves, but others. So today I'll be going through not only a model that Shay spoke about, but just also a little bit about leadership, because I think how could you talk about change without it? How could you talk about transition back into workplaces, or, you know, heartfelt condolences to Victoria at the moment, who are transitioning back out of work today and tomorrow. So there's a lot of dynamic situations going on across the world, and of course in our own lives. So in terms of leadership, it would be, as I've mentioned, it would be, actually I'm just going to jump to something else, I apologise, and that is the next slide. So transition, whilst there are stories of many people suffering, and of course in Kyla's example, animals suffering and her volunteers suffering through these horrific things that are happening in 2020. There are also some really inspiring and positive stories about businesses shifting, businesses pivoting, and people within that benefiting. So I really wanted to touch on 3 examples of organisations that are doing wonders and doing well and are shifting and being able to adapt not only their own teams but other people. So the first example of that is Accor. Accor went from 80% occupancy globally to single-digit check-ins. Now you can imagine the shift of that, and rather than keeping hotels vacant, they immediately switched to offering their hotel rooms to vulnerable people. So I'm speaking of domestic violence sufferers, I'm speaking of the homeless, and I'm speaking of frontline workers who have needed a break or haven't been able to go home for fear of infecting their own families. And Accor have done that not only to help others, but to keep their people employed. And I imagine that story would be enlightening to hear, because it's so much about caring for the humanity in this. It's so much about caring for their own people, and also people who may not have opportunities to be able to self-isolate or who are in harm's way. Which leads me to Deliveroo. Deliveroo in the UK had a rider who was delivering food and came upon a situation where they noticed that a child may be at risk. And as a result of that happening, it has sparked a partnership between Deliveroo and the NSPCC, which is the National Society of Protection for Children in Harm. I can't remember the last C. And essentially now that NSPCC will be delivering training to all riders so that they know what to detect, so that they can see in case a child is at harm, then they can be reported and the child can be brought to safety. So can you imagine being that Deliveroo rider? That person who thought they were just delivering your meal in the evening now has a responsibility well outside of their locus of control, but it brings such meaning and purpose to their jobs. So if people are interested in that, that's an opportunity for them to be able to give back in such a different way than they probably ever assumed. And then we have an example closer to home, Stage Kings. Stage Kings are an event staging business who in one day lost their 2020 income. And as so many businesses are reticent to lose their hand-picked teams, the owners said, we've got to keep our staff, we've got to keep these incredible people. And so within a day, another day, this is how quickly they were able to shift and pivot. They recognised that there was probably a hole in the market of home-delivered desks. So people all of a sudden in lockdown working from home, and maybe the kitchen table isn't a possibility for people to work at if you have children. And what they did is they developed a flat pack assembled thing that you can put together yourself without actually tools. So it slots in together and it creates this incredible desk. They now have a range of over 40 items, and they've grown their staff from 12 to 50 employees. They're also giving back to the community. They have a charity which supports the entertainment industry, and as we know, that's been completely desecrated, and they've been able to donate to date $32,000 towards that cause. So they're just 3 examples of incredible business shifts that have been able to happen, but it's the leadership that created that. It's the teams, it's people being involved in the direction of their own business and the direction of their staff within those businesses to be able to shift and to grow. And that is so very vital. Leaders who understand the most effective way to lead are benefiting their people and the wider community, which I think is so very important. And that leads us to talking a little bit about leadership in 2020. As Kyla mentioned, we are in unprecedented times. Leaders today are expected and are put in the position of needing to shift so very quickly. They're overcoming challenges, they're facing challenges that they've never ever seen before. And the level of dynamicism. What's the word, Mark? In the environment. Thank you. There you go. I can't even say it. You say it. Is something that people just aren't equipped for. Just like Kyla's business Wires was not equipped for the level of transition and the level of change that needed to happen. Everyday businesses are not, and look, some businesses, let's be honest, haven't made it, and that's terribly upsetting. So when we're talking about, and I think we have to even talk about the rest of Australia and Victoria separately, because the rest of Australia is seeing those natural transition back into the workplace. They're seeing possibly looking at a hybrid work model, one of where some days some people may come in, some days other people may come in, some people may be too afraid to come in, so they stay working from home, and others can't wait to get back into the office. And the leadership around that is so very, very vital for it to be not only individual, to meet the individual needs of the people, but also still maintaining a business focus so that they do get through this pandemic and come out the other side. So when talking about hybrid business models, what works for you? How do you keep the culture going? How do you maintain the culture when you have people on Zoom calls and you can't just go up to someone and say, hey, I just want to ask you a quick question? Because it has to be arranged, it has to be planned. It's a very different environment for people, not only sitting at home or sitting in the office, to be able to interact with each other. And so what's so very vital is that the leadership comes from a place of focusing in a new way. I really, when I talk about leadership, it's not just leaders of teams, it's individual contributors who can affect change as well and as much as leaders. And the frame that I always like to use is self first, then others. How do you, in terms of self-leadership, affect your emotions, your thoughts, your actions? How are you responsible for how you are in the day? How are you taking on your thoughts, and which way are you taking your thoughts? Are you concerned, and is it something that you need to discuss, or is it something that you're fairly pragmatic about? There's an acknowledgement of self to others, and what I mean by that is, how are you experiencing your own emotions? How are you experiencing your thoughts? What are some of the ways in which you're adapting to this change? You may be looking for the opportunities. You may be freaked out and not coping very well. And there's a scale and a spectrum of how people are experiencing it. And I just want to validate you and say that wherever you are on that scale, it's entirely appropriate for you and where you are at today. You don't need to be pretending and covering up your emotions if you are on the more nervous and anxious scale. Or if you're fairly pragmatic, it's about how do you have empathy for people who are going through that. So it's about acknowledging where you are, being open and honest, and then moving on to how others are, because once you understand yourself, you can understand each other better. And just a short thing on the new way of leadership that people are expecting. Being authentic to you, being clear about your intentions, being clear about the direction you want to take, being collaborative, asking people how they are, asking people what they would like to see and do and act, so that you can be empathetic and that you can lead from a place of inspiration. So I'll just pause it there for now, and we'll come back to the model after this. So I'd love to hear if there's any questions.
Oh, well, of course, heaps of questions. The first thing that comes to mind when you think about leadership of self, meaning that, of course, you have to take care of yourself before you can take care of others. It's a bit like the metaphor of the oxygen in there. You probably stopped yourself from going there, didn't you?
I did. Yeah, I literally did.
I just wrecked it. Yeah. Good job. Look, so the thing is that about that, and a lot of the research has been showing that there's a high level of anxiety in the community because of transition. Yes. And so actually, if you're a leader, it strikes me that of teams, workplaces, or volunteers, in your case, it's almost like I can imagine there being even more anxiety, because it's like, I've got to get myself sorted quickly, and there's so many unknowns. So what would your suggestions be for how do we best lead thyself?
Lead thyself?
Yes.
Lead thyself.
Lead thyself.
I think it really comes back to how can we recognise where we're up to? So how do we recognise and be honest? And one of the prompts that I was going to say to the listeners was, write down how you're feeling. Allow how you're feeling to be okay. I think the first step is for us to be real about who we are at the moment. And it may not be who we are in the future, and it may not who we were in the past. So firstly, I would say, how do we recognise ourselves? Secondly, I would say, allow those feelings to be valid. Allow yourself to feel those feelings. The only job of feelings is actually to be felt. But how often are we shoving them down, pretending that we're okay, pretending that we've got it together? That's where the harm is done, in the pretense, in the trying to cover up how we're feeling, so that we can't say to someone, I'm really struggling, I need some support right now. And when we come back to leaders who can say that and be real about where they're at, that allows their teams to be that way. It shows that human element, because we are all dealing in such complex emotions. Some day you might be fairly pragmatic, and then the next day you might be really, really anxious, depending on what news report you've heard, or the changing face of what's going on right now. So it's really about being real and open and honest with who you are or what you're experiencing right now.
I think it comes back to this idea that we're in a workplace environment where we are being more open about looking after each other. So, how you doing? Good. Move on.
Yes.
Or actually not so good. Oh, tell me about that. Right?
Yes.
We're actually seeing a transition in the workplace to being more open and familial with one another. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that one too, Shay.
Oh, a number of thoughts, but maybe just reflecting on how, as a team, actually one of my colleagues suggested a little model for us to use as a team to help us articulate our feelings in still a somewhat professional way, which was as part of a weekly catch-up, which we began with COVID when everyone was starting to move to remote working, is at the end of the catch-up, everyone was to give themselves a rating out of 5. So it's very simple, and 5 being, I'm on top of the world, I'm feeling great, and 1 being the opposite. And actually everyone was really very honest, and people identified different points on the scale on all different days, and it was really good because it helped us share, it helped us bring each other up when we were low. So it was a nice way to understand and self-regulate, where am I at, where's my team at? So it was really helpful for me to get a pulse all the time in a way that didn't mean that they have to articulate a feeling. They could just give me a number and it gave me a read. Yeah. I found that was really valuable.
I absolutely love that, and I think that is so key, because there's actually studies done that if you are allowing people to just be who they are, then they overall have a better well-being. I think that if you're focused on a well-being, employee engagement can go from say 7% to 55%, and that simple measure can save lives. There is other studies that I won't go into that will save lives for someone. Because what's that about? It's about being seen in how they are and accepted. And so being seen and accepted is the key. And I absolutely love that you've done that. Well done. That's fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you to James, my colleague, who
James,
introduced that to the team. Yeah, we've really embraced it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think as a team to embrace it, because there can be a sense of vulnerability that comes with that. If I tell you, is this bad for me now?
Created a real trust, I think, between us.
Yeah, absolutely, which is so vital. Something that you said before, you said, I'm good, you move on. The automatic response is always, I'm good. yet I'm crumbling inside.
Right.
Or I'm good, but I'm saying that to give you lip service because I don't want to go there. And so sometimes it's a case of, you're good, are you sure you're good? And then that allows that space for people to go, actually I'm not. Whereas if you go good and move on, they've just given you lip service when they may actually not be.
Yeah,
It's
no, I think
important to
this is
judge.
a really key concept in thinking about transition. I've got a question here too. I'm going to read from somebody who said, Sasha, you spoke about the importance of leadership when going through change. What is more important for leaders when going through a crisis or large change? Is it the speed in which you can change and be flexible, or the accuracy in your decision? Go fast or be right? What matters?
Gosh, how could you be right? I don't think anyone can be right now. I think they can do the best with the tools and the information that they have. So I would say that, look, I come from a very humanistic perspective, so I would be like, check in with your teams, make sure everyone's okay, open, honest conversations would be where I would go. But in terms of being a leader and saving a business, for instance, I would say in this moment it's speed and adaptability and knowing how, or not even knowing how, but choosing the very best option you can find for yourself and then go down that path and maybe pivot from that point. But in terms of getting it right in a pandemic, I just don't know if there is there's no perfectionism. There's no way in getting something right. It's more a case of how do we explore different options to see which is the best way for us. And that will change depending on which organisation we're speaking of.
Yeah, great. Well, so Sasha, you had a few more points to make before we wrap up, and of course keep those questions coming through.
Yes, I would love to hear more questions. Thank you. So I just wanted to run through you a model. Oh, this is my favourite. One of my favourite quotes is by Brené Brown. And it says, who we are is how we lead. And I am going to go through a model of a thinking model that you can adapt to your own businesses, but then also a profile of leaders. And you may find yourself in one of those. And this talks to that. Just a note on Brené Brown, she has an incredibly humanistic approach, and anytime I listen to her, I cry. I don't know why, she's just incredible. So Dare to Lead is a brilliant book if you are looking for having those open and honest conversations, yet not knowing quite how to do it just yet. Okay, so I'm going to be talking through the critical alignment model, which is a model developed by Sharon Pearson of the Coaching Institute. And it's a fantastic model for thinking. It allows you to apply it to any part of your business. It could be transition, change management, business planning. I've even used it personally to decide some personal things because it's a thinking model that allows you to go through the steps systematically. So as you can see, purpose is in the middle, and purpose will affect every part of the other quadrants. First we have vision, then we go to structure, implementation and people. So the first one is purpose. Another Brené Brown, I'm sorry, this is the last one. But it really talks to clear is kind, unclear is inclined. So what I mean by that is in the relation to purpose, it's your overall why for doing something. It's the overall main focus of what you're wanting to achieve or do in your business. And the purpose is one to be articulated and shared. It's not one to keep to yourself. When we talk about people being aligned to an organisation, it's because we have a clear understanding of the purpose and we have a clear understanding of how we interact within that. So that's why the Brené Brown quote. And so the purpose here is, what is your overarching thing that is going to drive you and that you refer back to every time. What's so interesting about purpose is often people will pop it up and then kind of put it to one side and then keep jumping into one of the ones is implementation, which is where people will jump into just the doing before they've done the thinking, whereas this is the opposite. Do the thinking first. And that moves us on to vision. And so this is about business goals. So you've got your purpose, then you go to your business goals. What are we trying to achieve here? And we know our why. It talks about your values in your organisation. It talks about your personal values as well. So what are the values that we stand for? What are the standards that we will bring because of those values? And what are the beliefs and expectations that we have? Do we believe that this vision is possible? Do we believe that we have the team in place to do that? Do we all understand what is expected of us, and what do we expect of our leadership team, and what self-expectations can we bring? And what are our attitudes around this? Are we looking at opportunity, or are we focused on the problem? And the idea around vision is to blue sky it, to really look at the opportunities and see how you can bring that purpose to life is truly where it comes from in this one. Then we move down to structure. So this is, we've got our purpose, we've got our vision, then we move to structure. So what are the systems and the strategies and the best practice benchmarks that we can bring as an organisation that feed into our vision, which feed into our purpose? So the model can go up or around, or the other way around. It used to be a model like that. That's why I'm referring to it like that. And so here it's about what are the KPIs? What are the plans that we have? What are the different ways in which we can focus so that we can get all of those going? Because the structure will lead into implementation, which will lead into people. The next is actually the implementation. Now, one thing that I just wanted to talk about is so often people are very driven by implementation. What's the problem? Okay, let's go do it. What's the problem? Let's go do it, without the steps beforehand. And so I encourage you, if you are just going, oh, I'm reacting, oh, I'm going to get in and do it, because people love to do, right? A lot of us just love to do and not really focus clearly about where we're going and why we're doing it. I always encourage you, purpose and vision are critical. They are the points that are vital for you to be able to get to create your structure. And then when we get to implementation, it's what do we do? How do we do it? Who does it? And in this environment, it's very much around, this is where the action happens. This is where we all go to. And then of course our people. Obviously, people do the implementation, but it's also how do we keep our culture? How do we develop our staff? How do we motivate, mentor and inspire our staff so that they feel a part of the purpose, they feel a part of the vision, they know which structures are in place for them to be able to achieve that, they know what they need to do, and they know that they're being taken care of. So that's the critical alignment model. I'm most happy to answer any questions around that. But I did just want to go to the next phase, and this is just talking about what are the leadership types within the critical alignment model. So you may find yourself here when I go through. So vision is about a visionary. So someone who is, actually I'll just go visionary, architect, dynamo, collaborator, and then I'll explain who they are. So a visionary sees the big picture. They are your blue sky thinkers. They are the people that will always, in any action or any decision, will lead back to purpose. Their strength is seeing the purpose and the overall vision. Then the architect is someone who sees the moving parts. They're someone who loves systems and structures and strategies, and they know what goes where and why it goes where. So I'd love to hear about whether you're seeing yourself in some of these. Then we go to the dynamo. This is the people that love to get things done. They love detail. They love that sense of achievement. They're your people who tick off a list and feel so delighted that they're doing that. They get that true sense of, of satisfaction and enjoyment. And then you've got your collaborators. So people who have strength in working with others. They share ideas. They're designed to help and inspire others, and they develop others to their full potential. And I can see myself in so many of those, and I work with a tool that has a scale of which I could share with you if you're most interested in that, because we do have different weightings and we do have different areas, but we tend to be one type, and then we'll weight down from there. So I just wanted to say there's my details. Please get in touch if I can assist in any way. There's the correct spelling of my name, which I believe is important. And thank you so much.
Well, that's great, and thank you so much, Sasha. Can we actually I'll get the guys to put up that tool there, and because I wanted to get a couple of quick reflections before we wrap up. It actually strikes me that this can be used as a diagnostic on how we're dealing with change and transition.
It can be.
So if, for example, what is the purpose of the organisation? Does that need to change?
Yes.
Does our vision need to change, like the example you shared of the Stage Kings, right?
Yeah.
So suddenly they've just got to getting new vision for desks or the environment in which they're creating this, right?
Yeah.
And so forth. So actually using it as a diagnostic tool, is that a good approach you'd suggest?
Absolutely, yeah. So that's a lot of the work that I do with organisations, is that I do an audit. I do an audit of what is your purpose, what are your values, what are your visions, and there's often there's an ideal that they'd like to go to, and then there's reality. And knowing where you're coming from leads you to where you can go to, and it's that space in the middle where there's some fantastic conversations to be had, some clarities, and sometimes it's really about being honest and just saying we think that we're like this, but the reality is that we are like this. So it's a great diagnostic tool, as well as one that can be, helped for thinking and planning.
Now, we had a question here about our leadership styles. What are our leadership styles? Somebody wants to know what our leadership styles are. So I'm going to. There's no rehearsal on this. So Shay, what do you reckon?
Do you want me to go back to the slide?
Come on.
Well, when I was looking at those styles, one thing I will say is I felt really proud of my team, because I could see how we all were a nice cross-section of those leadership styles. And I thought, you know what, we're a good team.
Yeah.
Like, where would I put myself? Oh gosh, this is a bit on the spot, but maybe that visionary. Like, I think as the leader of the team, in that, when I look at my Space & Co team, I think I'm probably sit in the visionary. I won't go into why I say that, but that's where I'll put myself.
Great.
I'm definitely a collaborator. Well, it's interesting. I go, because I've obviously done the tool on myself, I go collaborator because I'm all about the people. Then I've got dynamo, then I've got visionary, and then I've got the architect. So when I look at running my business, I'm like, okay, who can I outsource the architect to? Because I'm less loving systems. I'd rather be with the people.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I think my people know who are the architects.
Yeah. And they are so important for people like us.
Now, Kyla, I don't know how you feel about being put on the spot. What do you reckon?
Well, look, I would say I've got a blend of the four, but if I had to pick one, I'd probably pick architect. Partly because I think, in playing that particular role, for me, it pulls in the big picture and the detail, and it's about making the two work together, bringing it together so that it's actually something that can be executed.
Look, your title is operations manager, so
Yes.
I suspect you're in the right job. Wow, that's fantastic. What a great insight. Well, look, we've got a couple of minutes to go, but there was a question here about recommendations for how to upskill each leadership style during a crisis or change. Just a quick...
Sorry,
so the question is, do you have any recommendations on how to upskill each leadership style in transition and crisis?
Yes.
Can you just do the whole workshop in like a minute?
Yes,
or
you
less?
can. Oh, in a minute. Okay. We are all adaptable, and we are all able to learn and to grow. And it's a case of where are you sitting today, being real about where you are and where are your strengths. How you do that is so much about an intention of wanting to do that. I know that I've only got like 30 seconds left, but essentially it's about an intention. And then it's about how do you draw in those people that can help you get there. So for instance, if you're a leader but you're not great in spreadsheets, find someone who is excellent in that and help them upskill you. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a top-down approach. It can be, okay, where do I need the people to help me? Just like Kyla's mentioned, she has a mix of the teams, and that is how you leverage each other. So if you're a visionary and you've got someone who's more about the people, how do you align the two together? And that is up to you as to how you go about doing that. But yes, of course, I can tell you many, many, many ways, but for the time, that's about as far as I've got.
Exactly right. Well, you've given your details, so that there's an
yes,
opportunity
exactly.
for
Reach out.
Look, before we wrap up, I wanted to, we'll thank our panel in a minute, but just a quick teaser, because I think it leads very well into our next event. So the fifth event in this series, the Comm.Unity series, brought to you by Space & Co. And we're going to have a customer panel, a member panel, so people who work in Space & Co. offices going to come in here, and we're going to talk about the future of the workplace. And of course, that's been an undercurrent of this conversation today, but we're really going to drill into it next time to talk about what does the future of the workplace look like? What changes do we think might be coming, and how can we prepare ourselves for that? So the date that I want you to put in your calendar right now, just try and keep this tab open, but go to the other tab, put in your calendar the 6th of August at a slightly earlier time of 11:30. So 6th of August at 11:30, make sure you're there to talk about the future of the workplace. So we're nearly out of time, so I would like you to give a big digital warm welcome, a thank you rather, to our fantastic speakers, Kyla and Sasha. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having us.
And I appreciate your insights as always, Shay.
Always lovely to be here. Thank you, Mark. And
No worries.
You both.
Thank you.
And of course, for more information about Space & Co, go to the website, Space & Co. We mentioned to the URL for wires.org.au, and you can find Sasha on LinkedIn. So finally, as a reminder, there is a pop-up coming when you close out of this screen. We'd love to get your feedback. We're continually improving. We really value your input and your feedback on today's session, so please take a moment to do that for us. Until next time, it's been fantastic to host this conversation and to be with you today. I appreciate your time, and I hope that you got as much out of this today as I did, and we'll see you next time.